Hi class, I'm going to talk with you today about Chapter 1 of Burnt Offerings, the novel that we're reading this term. It might be a good idea for you to take a look at DNR 4 so that you can, kind of write down answers to any questions that maybe you were having trouble with. All right, so I think immediately in the novel we start to get a sense of what these characters are like. Immediately we start to understand that Marian is someone who cares about the condition of her home. She cares about teaching her son David how to take care of things because immediately, like on the first page, she makes him stop and come back and hang his clothes up in the closet. So immediately, details that give us an insight into character are established. Page 2, we learn about the apartment building in which they live. We learn that it is filled with basically stay-at-home moms, right? And kids are running around all the time, screaming, and parents or moms are screaming at the kids. And so that's kind of what this apartment building is like, the people who live there. We learn a few pages later about the physical condition of the building, but we'll get to that in a moment. Further down on page 2, we are told that they are living in Queens, and we also come to understand that Marian really is not happy there, right? I mean, what is it that Marian wants? We need to think about her behavior and her attitude toward this apartment that she spends so much time in. Yeah, she wants a clean home. Yeah, she would like to have some peace and quiet. But there's something more that Marian wants, and we need to think about that. On page 3, we know that she is an affectionate mother because she, wants to hug David. She tries to take care of him. She tucks in his shirt. She does care about him and, yes, about how he looks. She took the shirt in, but I think she seems to be an affectionate mother. He tells her he's going to be late. And she says, so be late. The only time I get to see you is when I'm yelling at you. That's why I yell so much. So I guess he's getting a little bit older. He's more independent. He wants to do things on his own. And it kind of, I think, makes her feel conflicted as a mother. We have a bit of foreshadowing on page 3. And it depends on how far you've made into the novel, whether you view this foreshadowing as significant or not. But Marian... we were told about her hair color, and then we're told that she found one gray strand, and she immediately pulls it out, right? So this tells you a little bit more about her, that she's not comfortable with the idea of getting gray hair. And then we think about the significance and the symbolism of gray hair. There are certain things that gray hair implies, right? It can imply aging, becoming decrepit, but it also implies wisdom. Okay, so there's kind of a flip side to the whole idea of gray hair. On page 3, we're told Marian sat back on her heels and waited for the door to slam shut and rattle the windows. The room was back in order temporarily. A magazine view of what a boy's room should be, with Peanut's pillows arranged neatly on the bedspread, a small desk bookcase unit, highly polished, football posters, and antique gun prints. And then we're given a few more details. It's almost like this, as it says, is a magazine picture of what a boy's room should look like. I think that matters to Marian. I think she wants things to look a certain way, and she strives to make that happen. And she's satisfied now because this room, even if it's temporary, looks like a picture out of a magazine. So we get a sense that Marian has... she strives for perfection. She's sort of idealistic. And then we learn a little bit about Aunt Elizabeth. Aunt Elizabeth is, how old does it say Aunt Elizabeth is? I would have to find the exact page in which that occurs, but I think she's in her 70s. And I would have to look up the typical age at which people passed in 1973, because that's when this book was published. I'm not sure how long people lived back then. But I think, 76 would have been, you're getting up there, especially back in 1973. So she is an elderly woman, but she doesn't seem all that elderly. I mean, if we read the descriptions of her in this novel, she's completely, cognizant. She has a sense of humor. She just doesn't seem her age. And she doesn't have too much trouble getting around, right? She's pretty independent. So we know a little bit about Aunt Elizabeth. And then page 4, there's this moment with Marian in which we see some deep emotion in her. It isn't obvious, I think, in the text. It doesn't jump out at you, but if you just pay attention to what she's doing at the top of page 4, you can see how she feels about David. So she's standing there at his closet. She's been vacuuming, and it says, for a minute or so, she just stared into the closet. This is David's closet. The scales below had finally become Bach, and maybe she liked 2D's Bach after all, because something in the melody moved her to touch David's suit jacket, his raincoat, and the ratty blue bathrobe which she'd have to force herself to replace someday. The feel of it, and the melody below, clinkers and all, sent her to the window, where she waited for him to cross the courtyard. He didn't, but if he had, she would have called David and thrown him a package of Yankee Doodles. Yankee Doodles are the snack he likes. So we have this moment where Marian, she becomes very, very sentimental, almost like melancholy, right? And she's thinking about losing him, about him growing up, and how she doesn't want to part with that ratty blue bathrobe, although, someday she'll want to throw it out because he won't be able to wear it anymore and it's old and everything. But yet, it's his. And so it's like she misses him and she wants to go. She goes to the window and looks for him, but she doesn't see him. So that's sort of a tender moment we see from Marian. On page 5, we learn that this building is not really well maintained, and it's not a peaceful place to live. There's graffiti. We see graffiti in the elevator, and you have no privacy. You can smell what everybody else is cooking. It's noisy. Apparently, there's an old man he pees under the mailboxes. So this is not an ideal place to live, and I kind of understand why Marian would want to get out of there. But yeah, we learn that she likes nice things, because on page 5, it tells us that she spends a lot of time in the apartment. And because she spends so much time in the apartment, I think she wants to make it a better place to be. She wants to be able to enjoy some of the time that she spends there. So it talks about some of the furniture that she has bought, like a French provincial buffet, a mahogany and bronze dory set, and these things cost money. And so sometimes she has taken temporary jobs, I guess because David's in school. She's taken a temporary job just to help pay for these items that she likes to buy. Ben kind of makes fun of her for doing it, because he realizes this, we don't have enough room. This seems to be an obsession with her. At the bottom of 5, June to September, when the apartment, as far as she was concerned, became uninhabitable completely. So the summer months, she just finds it intolerable to be there. On page 6, we learn about this lady that she and Ben always seem to see sitting at her window, and she's kind of like overseeing everything. I don't really know if that's her job, but they call her the supervisor because she's always watching everything that goes on. And it's almost like she never moves. She's always there. It says, a huge woman filling a 4th floor window. She was always there, it seemed, like some bulbous gargoyle leaning on a pillow and staring impassively. Ben insisted she was a household god and naked from the waist down. He's joking. But something you want to think about is the image of this lady sitting in her window, and then any similar figure that seems to exist later in the novel. We learn a little bit more about Marian and Ben's private life, in particular their sex life. Marian seems interested in sex with Ben, but she's bothered by the fact that they don't seem to have any privacy. We have this description of, she's always concerned with people looking in the windows, which, I mean, I can imagine the buildings are fairly close together. People can see if they wanted to. Ben doesn't seem as bothered by this at all. But he also doesn't seem very sensitive to the fact that she is bothered by it. She feels almost like it's dehumanizing, the fact that they have no privacy. She says on page 6, "I feel like a dirty joke." And he laughs about that. So there's a bit of, I think, insensitivity on Ben's part. So these are reasons that compel Marian to want to get out of the city for the summer. On page 7, Ben basically tells her, this is an exercise in futility. It's just something to kill time. You're looking up these apartments that we probably can't afford anyway. But we learn that Ben has his own issues that may not be apparent on the surface, at least to Marian. He seems to feel that the city is stressful and is oppressive. At the bottom of 7, Ben inched the Camaro forward, the light changed, and as far as he was concerned, there was a God after all. So it's like, just making it through traffic, finding a place to park, all these things that people have to deal with when they live in a very congested area. So he has to deal with this day in and day out. Page 8, it says he picked up a post and a pack of cigarettes, paid the old lady who never smiled. So just this idea of people are not happy in the city. Everybody's too stressed out in the city. Further down on page 8, let's see. What kind of place was this to raise a kid? Nassau, Suffolk. There were alternatives, weren't there? Maybe even Rockland or farther upstate. Marian was right. The city became less appealing every day, more abrasive. Maybe they should start thinking about it seriously. That was important, much more important than the fact that, yes, he lost his goddamn car. So, yes, he has his issues, but with the stressors of living in the city, but he's also thinking about his son David, and he doesn't really want that life for David. So in some ways, Marian and Ben are not in disagreement about wanting to get out of the city. She just seems, in some ways, more desperate to do it, and he has reasons why he doesn't want to, like his job. But anyway, so they're not completely at odds about it, but it's interesting what happens a little bit later when Marian is trying to convince him that they should go away for the summer. Right. Let's flip over to page 11. So they have to deal with this noise, the piano, mostly, which is very distracting to them. The person who plays the piano downstairs, and Ben, at the top of page 11, "I can't take it." Ben called suddenly from the living room. His voice rose to a parody of the yell, "I can't take it." And I think the way we're supposed to read this is that he's like, "Oh, I can't take it," but he's not being, like, completely sincere, like he's losing his mind. He's just like, yeah, I don't like this. I can't take this any longer. And he, like, stomps on the floor, right, because he wants the person to stop playing the piano. She's a little upset, though, because he's, like, making all her collectibles, like her figurines and stuff, kind of move, like she's afraid they're going to fall and break. But I don't think she's angry at him or anything. It just says in the middle of page 11, she moved around the room, straightening the pictures and sconces, checking the lamps and bowls and figurines and vases that filled all the polished surfaces. So again, that's Clueless. She has a lot of stuff that she collects. Again, he's kind of funny about it. He says, I whooped it good. Like, oh, I made them stop. But we know that's only temporary. They don't really stop. They kind of have a joking relationship, right? They seem to get along well. So Marian comes back with beer, and Ben says, it's got to be a conspiracy. The whole bloody city is after my ass. He patted the cushion beside him. Marian handed him his glass, took out 2 coasters, and settled beside him. So the idea that they can kind of sit together and talk about this situation that they don't enjoy. They seem to get along well, even if Ben is not quite as upset about the lack of privacy as Marian. She tells him on page 12, let's move, right? Top of page 12, let's move. He smiled, staring into space, and pulled her closer to him. And then she tries to just shut it all out, right? Like she says, there's no one down there, just a piano playing itself. Basically she's telling him, let's just block it all out. Further down on page 12, we learn that Ben is not completely satisfied in his job. He's a teacher, and sometimes he, I guess, is a bit dissatisfied because he I guess wants his students to be more engaged in what they're learning, and he has some issues with maybe his bosses, the administration perhaps. And then he says at the bottom of page 12, you know something? I don't like what I'm doing very much. He said it as though it had become a revelation to him, as though it had come as a revelation to him. I think we sort of gather that he doesn't like what he does very much, but I don't know how often he's actually admitted this to Marian. And then she says, you always say that this time of year. He gets burnt out every year. And he says, I always mean it. And then he says, she says a month to go, and he says, not this time, baby, I'm cracking. He sat up and looked at her sideways, announced, I lost the car. So I think he feels that the stress is actually getting to him, and it's growing. Like, it's not going away after the school year's over. It's like building up year after year, and he's really starting to feel the pressure. Page 14. So she's trying to convince him, hey, we should get away for the summer. And it says that as she's described this place to him, page 13, and then, listen, she read on, long season, very reasonable for the right people. The italics were hers. Racist pigs, he said. So he's interpreting that as these people mean the right people, meaning that they're talking about white people, like they'll only write to white people, which is not what it says. But we only learn later on in the novel what they mean by the right people. And it doesn't have anything to do with race, I don't think. So she says, that's not what they mean. She held the paper out to him like a particularly ripe tomato. So she's offering him something, right? A particularly ripe tomato. Oh, it's so good. This luscious tomato. Isn't it tempting? Isn't it something you would just love to sink your teeth into? So she's trying to entice him with this, right? Like, don't you want this? Don't you want to look at this? At least entertain the thought of going there. Farther down on page 14, he mentions all these things that she has bought over the years. The end tables, the lamps, the tchotchkes, and Christ knows what you've got stashed away in the closets. Reasonable, or some parody of the word, has left us with roughly $2,000 in the bank after 9 years. So this is his reason why he's saying they can't go away for the summer, because they just can't afford it. And part of that reason is because she buys too many things. She accuses him of being negative. She says he's negative all the time. Page 15, here we really start to see, we do see it a little bit later as well, but here we really start to see Marian's attempts to manipulate Ben. So she's telling him, first she makes like this pouty face right on page 15. Basically, she's telling him, showing him, I'm going to be upset with you if we don't at least consider this. So she's trying to manipulate him. And then he accuses her of trying to seduce him sexually to get what she wants. And then she says to him, these sweet little gingerbread people who are so reasonable, they're expecting us. So she already called them and told them that they're going to come and look at it. And notice she calls them sweet little gingerbread people. That's kind of an odd description, you know. It makes me think of a fairy tale. Makes me think of people who were totally innocuous and sweet, like she says. And then we have this narration toward the bottom of 15. But of course he'd go along with her, just as he had for the past several years. He had mouthed the words, offered the obligatory protest, and she'd reacted antiphonally. So basically he gives in to her. It's a pattern with him. She's behaved in a way that shows she's upset with him, which is a means of manipulating him, and he gives in because he just doesn't want to deal with it. Page 16. She was silent, waiting for him to relent, and he can feel a sly, sneaky touch inside the leg of his trousers. So again, we see her. If acting angry or upset or pouting is not going to work on him, then Marian will try other means. And we want to think about how these characters change. So we have this image of Marian, and we have this image of Ben, and we see how later, especially when they're at the house, they begin to change. And so we want to pay attention to the ways in which they change. So he finally relents and says, I suppose there are worse ways to spend a Saturday. She smiled, but with no hint of triumph. The voice was vaguely repentant. You're not mad, are you, about the calls? I should have waited, I know, but you can be... And I love this in you. I really, truly love it. You can be so impossibly negative at times. She brought her face level with his. It could be so good for us if it worked out. No worrying about Davy and that damn bike, or me for that matter, wondering whether you'll find me here or splattered on the pavement below if I have to spend another summer in this bin. Notice that there's a lot of joking between Ben and Marian. And it's like hyperbolic sort of joking. What I mean by hyperbolic is it's exaggerated, like, oh, you know, I'm losing my mind. That's what Ben says, basically, you know. And Marian says, you know, basically, I'm going to jump out the window if I have to spend another summer here. So the joking is hyperbolic, but we need to think about the possible truth that underlies that hyperbole. And how does that play out in the rest of the novel? So we learn, yeah, she's basically saying there that she feels desperate. She feels desperate. Farther down the page, on page 16, he remembers, I think, where he left the Camaro. And it says, in front of its large lobby window, he remembered very clearly the plastic fern, the lamp, and the chairs inside, all of them chained to the wall. So we have this image of, you know, things being chained down, the image of the city as a prison, really. So Marian and Ben, even though they have different reasons for how they feel, and they differ in the degree to which they want to get out of the city, they both feel that urge that they really don't want to be in the city anymore. So I'm going to stop my discussion there, and we will pick up with chapter 2.